And good morning, everyone, and welcome to Small Biz Matters.
This is the Community Radio Network on stations.
The half-hour pro. There he goes. See, we're experiencing some technical difficulties today. I was warned by the previous guys that there would be some issues, and so if we hear a bit of stop-starting, that's not me, that's the computer. But welcome, everyone. Welcome to Small Biz Matters, the half-hour program where you work on your business rather than in it. I am your trusted small biz advocate / advisor / admin expert / wearer of all hats, Alexi Boyd from Boyd Office Management Services, proud supporters of Triple H. And I'm very excited. I've got a fantastic guest in the show today, which I'm very excited to talk about. And we're going to be talking all about visas and applying and what impact the recent legislative changes you might have heard about in the last couple of weeks, how that's going to impact on small businesses, not only in our area, but obviously across Australia. And we have an expert in her field. We have Shelley Duffy here from Simply Visas, a local fantastic little business. Thanks for joining us, Shelley.
Thanks, Alexi. Pleasure to be here.
Now, tell me first about your journey, because we like to talk to people who live locally about what their experience has been. What is it that led you towards this career, and what sort of skills and expertise did you pick up along the way? Tell me a little bit about that.
So basically, I've been in the immigration space for about 10 years now, working in a corporate environment, and I decided to use the knowledge that I'd gained in that environment to start up my own business.
Very sensible.
And been going for the last 3 years now. So basically, I've tried to build my reputation around providing a personalised service that's tailored to people's needs, and through that dedication to providing that personalised service, that's led through the majority of my work coming through word of mouth.
It's quite funny you should say that personalised service, because there's a real disconnect between the corporate world and that personalised service. Was something you were craving when you were in the corporate world and you didn't feel that they could really deliver?
Yeah, I think so. I think when you're working in that large type of environment, it is you tend to get passed around to different people and things like that, whereas I wanted to build a one-on-one relationship with my clients.
When that's what we're experts at. That's what small business is all about, and why we're so good at as well.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, I think this is very topical, and the reason why I asked you to come on the show is because little variations that happen in government policy can actually have really big consequences to small business. As we all know, that could be anything from tax law changes to superannuation changes to employment law, and all these regulations and the claims by the government to be reducing red tape isn't really. I just feel like they're just tying knots in the red tape to trip us up. So last few weeks, there's been some pretty major overhauls to the 457 visa system in Australia. And if you're a small business that maybe relies on overseas workers that fill the void, or maybe you've got a lack of qualified, experienced personnel who live here, you might be looking offshore to try and fill that gap. These changes are going to have big consequences. And I think, I talk a lot on this program about, I'm a bit anti-offshoring, I'll be very honest about that. But this is not this situation. We're talking about businesses that literally cannot function, whether it be because of a brain drain situation or because the skill set just isn't there, or we don't have the history of upskilling workers in the way that they need it, that become quite crucial for those sort of visas. So these changes are going to have big consequences for now and into the future for businesses. And basically that's what today's show is all about, is sort of navigating that around a little bit. So talk me through why, in the first place, businesses tend to prefer overseas workers, and how hard is it really, if you're starting out, like most of us are in small business, you're going down the path of a new tack and you have really no clue where to begin. Is it one of those situations which is very, very hard to navigate your way around the use of overseas workers?
Look, it really depends on the company. There's a number of variables that come into play. So it depends on the size of the company, how many Australian workers you employ, what skill set you're actually looking for. And one of the major focuses from the department's perspective is on training. So what they want to see is that the business has a strong commitment to training. The reason why the department wants to see that information, and it is specifically you have to meet specific targets and benchmarks on a yearly basis. The reason why they want to see that information is to show that you have an interest in upskilling Australians and then reducing your reliance on overseas workers as a whole. So generally a business would consider employing an overseas worker when they have a genuine shortage. They've genuinely been out looking for an Australian worker to fill. In some instances it might also be that it's a very niche skill set, and we simply don't have it here in Australia. But in a lot of cases it's more a matter of a company actually has been seeking out an Australian employee and has been advertising aggressively and has been unable to attract the right type of talent.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I'm going to play devil's advocate here, because I know that this is in a lot of people's minds. We've all been in the corporate world, particularly if you've been in the advertising and marketing space, and we know that there's bosses out there who go, I really need this guy, but I need to employ him on a 457. Now, what do I have to do to pretend that I've advertised aggressively to try and get those other people? Are there people like that? Do they exist? And are there some people who are trying to fall through the cracks to try and get through that loophole?
Look, I guess there's always going to be people out there like that. But the majority of my clients, I think they genuinely have sought out an Australian in the first instance and they've struggled, and that's what's led them down the path of sponsorship. So, yeah, it's of course there's always going to be some people who try to slip through the cracks as such, but I think with these changes that are coming into place, that's really going to crack down on those types of organisations. So basically at the moment there's a requirement to do labour market testing, which means you have to prove that you've advertised within certain occupations, and there's certain exemptions around that. Mm-hmm. But
it's beginning to sound like employment law and modern award wages. I mean, it's just this is another example of why you need to seek out a consultant and get the expertise, because there's no way. It sounds like a minefield, really.
Yeah. So they're going to really tighten up on that, and it's going to be a requirement for all businesses unless international trade obligations apply, that you have to prove that you've advertised. So that actually means submitting to the department your job advertisements that you've placed, and they have to have occurred in the last 12 months. Mm-hmm. The number of applicants that you've received, why they were unsuccessful. So
your process of weeding out the ones that weren't successful.
Exactly.
And I guess you have to go through an interview process for a number of these as well, right? You can't just go, CV, no. Okay, I've done my process. It's more detailed than that, right?
Yeah, so they have a specific report which they often get companies to complete, which will say, this is the advertisement that we placed, this is how long it went through a recruiter, or we put it directly on Seek or on LinkedIn.
Processes and procedures that we keep going on about in this show. But you have to have those processes and procedures in place for your HR in general anyway. So it's a good idea to have that in place so that down the road, if you find yourself in a situation where you can't fill the gap with someone local, that you go, oh, look, I don't have to go back and fudge the reporting. I can say, look, this person literally didn't make it because they failed at this question, and this question.
Yeah, and generally most businesses will have that track record if it's a genuine need.
Yeah. Yeah. It's only when they're fudging it, they're not really going to have the records anyway. Now, you mentioned before the word sponsorship. Take me through, what does that mean? Because if we're talking to people in small business who have no idea and no experience in this field, what do you mean by the word sponsorship? How does that work?
Okay, so in broad terms, when you're looking to take on an overseas worker on a 457 visa, which is one of the most popular temporary work visas, there's 3 stages to the process. There's a sponsorship application where the business applies to become a business sponsor. At that stage, the department looks at things like the number of Australians, the total breakdown of the workforce. They look at the training within the organisation. They want to see the financials of the business. So they do go into quite a lot of detail at that stage. Once that's approved, you would gain approval as a standard business sponsor. So that would give you the ability to sponsor overseas workers for 18 months if you're a startup, which is a company less than 12 months old, and 5 years if you're an established business, so more than 12 months old.
And that's just, it's not necessarily on your P&L or how big you are or how many employees you've got. It's just whether you're an established business that can show year-on-year progression.
Profit isn't as important as showing that your company has the capacity to support the position that you're looking for.
Oh, great. So we've got companies who, like we all try so hard to be, tax negative, are not going to be disadvantaged by this process. Hey, hallelujah, finally a government organisation that actually sees that that's not that's part of the process.
Yeah, look, you can have a modest profit and still show that through your wages expenditure and things like that you can potentially support an additional position. So that definitely, it's not going to work against you as such, providing you meet the other variables in the application process. Now, once you're an approved sponsor, any time you have an overseas worker that you want to bring on board, you have to lodge a nomination. And the 457 business nomination is where you nominate a skilled overseas worker to fill a certain position within your business. At that stage of the application, the department looks at the job description for the role, and every occupation in Australia and New Zealand is classified. So basically, they'll compare the job description with the classification code that you've selected. They'll also look at things like the market salary rate for the position. So one of the things that the department is really concerned with is that the overseas workers not being disadvantaged in any way, and vice versa with an Australian. So they want to see that the overseas worker isn't being paid a rate that's less favourable than what an Aussie would receive. And similarly, if the Aussie's being paid less, they want to know why.
Yep.
So they kind of go into a lot of detail with the actual position itself. And then the final stage is the applicant's visa. And that's where the department looks at the worker's skill set in comparison to the job role that they're going to be undertaking. So every job role has a certain skill level. For example, a software engineer would require a relevant bachelor degree or 5 years experience in the field. So every code has its own classification, and the department wants to see that the person has the skill set to work in that position.
So it's a pretty tight fit, this match between the person that you're trying to put in the role and the role itself. It's not a simple process. This is quite complex. How long would you say it would take between making the decision or realising that you're going to need to go to an overseas worker all the way through to employment? Well, how much time should people allow? I know that's a bit of a how long is a piece of string question, but in the perfect scenario, with all the complications you've just listed, what would you people should expect?
It really depends. When it comes to the department, they can take as long as they wish to process an application. They set the processing standard at the moment as around 6 months.
Wow.
So
be patient, people. God, 6 months in small business world is like an eon.
It's crazy because what we aim to do at Simply Visas is we look to lodge all 3 stages of the application together. So we work with the company and the worker to get together all the paperwork, make sure everything is absolutely spot on. So by the time it hits a case officer's desk, they can make a decision straight away.
Yeah, they've got everything they need. They're not going back and forth and asking for information. Yep.
So, and look, some businesses who sponsor a lot of overseas workers who have an excellent track record with the department, their visa applications might be processed a bit quicker. You also have the option of requesting priority assistance from the department. Now, that in itself is another process in that you have to put in a formal request and you have to have a strong business case. The department won't simply just put your application above others unless you have good reason. And they also want to see supporting documentation. So it might be, look, we really need this worker to come on board because...
Or we're going to lose this contract, we're going to miss this client opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's going to mean X for the business, like in dollar terms, say. And then you attach a copy of the contract, put it forward for their consideration. And in that instance, you can get a decision back in 3 to 5 days.
Whoa.
So that's
a big difference between that and the 6 months. But either way, I mean, this is another great example of where hiring or engaging with a consultancy firm or practice that is an expert in their field across, this is across everything. Sometimes we can't wear all the hats and we've got to be able to outsource those sort of things because I can't imagine the myriad of complications there must be. This is like a paperwork nightmare. So yeah, definitely that's a good option. We're just going to take a quick break here on Small Biz Matters. You are listening to Triple H 100.1 FM. We'll be back after this. So today we are talking all things immigration. We're talking all things 457, the recent changes which can affect small businesses in quite a dramatic way. As we all know, the slightest change in government policy does mean an overhaul, does mean everyone's got to re-examine their processes and procedures. And I've got Shelley Duffy here today from Simply Visas. Just before the break, we were talking about what the process is and the three-step process is for engaging with someone who you think needs to come from as an overseas worker. What's your job as a business? What do you have to prove? What's their job as an immigrant? What do they have to prove? And then how do you tie that all in? And interesting concept there that you have to allow for about 6 months, which, as I mentioned, is quite a long time in small business world. So talk me through some of the recent changes, Shelley. There was an announcement, as most people who are not embedded in the industry, I went, that's kind of going to affect things. What do the recent changes mean? What are they specifically, and what do they mean for small business?
Well, first of all, there's a number of changes that have already come into play.
Oh, so when they actually came in the day they were announced?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's helpful.
Which is unheard of.
Oh, right.
Normally when the department's looking to implement changes, we do get a bit of notice, and they'll say, look, we're going to implement changes on 1st of July. They're going to be the following. It was a bit crazy because the lead up to the 457 changes being announced, there was things in the media saying that, look, we're looking at moderating numbers, but in terms of the abolition of the 457 visa, put everyone into a spin and a bit of a panic mode. So the phone was red hot that day and everyone was panicking. I'm on a 457 visa. What's going to happen?
Yeah. Do I have to leave the country tomorrow? Yeah,
exactly.
I can imagine. So it really affects people's lives in a pretty dramatic way, doesn't it?
Definitely. I think the main thing to point out at this stage is that the 457 visa program is still active. The visa itself won't actually be abolished until March of 2018. There have, however, been significant changes which were implemented on the 19th of April, and these affect the occupations that you can sponsor. So there's been 216 occupations removed from the skills list.
What's the total generally? I mean, are we talking 50% are gone or...?
Look, we've got, at the moment, I think it's basically split into two lists, and I think there's around 600 occupations all up, roughly. Don't quote me on that one. I have to, still getting my head around all the different, what's actually been removed. I think from the 19th of April, if your application was in and you've got an occupation that had been removed from the list, you basically will be given the opportunity to withdraw that application and seek a refund of the fees that you've paid to the department.
That's as a business?
As a business.
Yeah, okay.
But if you've engaged a professional like myself to process the application, obviously we've gone through the process and unfortunately they're not something you can recoup, but you have the small... I guess the option of being able to get a refund of those fees that you've paid to the department.
And which of those was it a particular sector that they targeted when they removed those 215 occupations? I mean, was it sort of, we're going to take away the chance for hospitality or retail? Was it a sector, or did they just sort of are they culling?
They didn't focus on any one sector. The information that we've received as agents is that they were occupations that maybe haven't been utilised a lot in the last 5 years.
Oh, okay.
They also liaise with the Department of Employment to see figures on different types of occupations, and that's kind of formed the basis of what occupations that have been removed.
That sort of makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, if they're putting all this extra admin time into facilitating these particular occupations that aren't being utilised by business for 457, you might as well cull them out so that you're not having to monitor that sector as well as other things. Yeah,
so that's obviously happened. That happened immediately. Those occupations were removed, and there's going to be further occupations removed again in July, again in December, and probably again in March.
What percentage do you foresee those to be?
I'm not sure. We just don't know at this stage.
We just do as we're told.
Yeah, that's one of the joys of being a migration agent. You just have to get up to date with the legislation and apply it correctly, and be able to advise your clients.
Yeah, sounds like bookkeeping. So we move forward, and we've got these things being streamlined, and that's obviously a big thing. Is that again, something that you can check? Is there a particular occupation you can punch into a website and say this is or is not no longer valid for a 4-5? I know that they're abolishing 457s altogether, but in terms of the ability to bring in an overseas worker, is there some sort of a website that you can check that on?
Yeah, definitely. So they've basically, if you go to the department's website, they have...
This is Department of Immigration?
Department of Immigration
Federal,
and Border Protection.
Right.
So they've got a link which actually takes you to the 216 occupations that have been removed. Now, what we had previously is, without going into too much immigration jargon here, they had a CSOL, which was the Consolidated Skilled Occupation List, and that's now been replaced by a short-term list. And we also had a SOL, which was the Skilled Occupation List, and that's been replaced by the medium and long-term skills shortage list.
That's what you're talking about with the whole, there's more of them coming out on this date, more of them coming out on this date, and that those lists are going to change continually.
They are. They're going to continue to be updated. Those occupation lists apply as at now. So what the effect that's had is that having a short-term list and a medium to long-term list now means that if you apply for a 457 anywhere between now and March next year, the validity period of the 457 visa will be affected. So formally, if you applied for a 457, it would be for up to 4 years.
Yeah,
however,
that's what it used to be.
Yeah. So, however, now, if you have an occupation that's on the short-term list, you'll get a visa for 2 years only, with the option to renew for a further 2 years onshore.
But that's you've already spent 6 months trying to find this person and apply, and then you're only going to be able to keep them for 2 years.
Yeah.
Right.
And then if you're on the medium to long-term list, you'll get your 4-year visa, and you'll also have a pathway to permanent residency. So, historically, the 457 has been a stepping stone in a way to permanent residency.
Irrespective of which occupation it is. And now they're just streamlining which ones can stay and which ones are only here for short term.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm just going to put my layman hat on here, which is what I've been wearing the whole time. But is that logical? I mean, does that sort of, if they're going to streamline things and we're going to get information from employment agency, or you guys are going to get information from employment statistics, and they're going to be cutting back. Do you think they're doing this in a sensible way? To me, it kind of makes sense what you're saying. Now that I've had it actually explained to me well, it makes sense that they're culling back on certain industries that aren't being used too much anyway. So they're reducing their administration time. Plus, they're making it more difficult to have the 457 as a pathway to permanent residency as an auto thing. They're making it so that only really the industries that we need these skilled workers in, which they have assessed as an agency to be the case. Have they done proper consultation, in your opinion? Have they talked to professional associations? Have they spoken to the IT sector about where the skills shortages is? Or have they literally just been looking at stats? What's your opinion on that?
As far as I can see, there is going to be consultation that will occur over the next few months and up until March next year.
That's because they're going to work out which of those lists and where those occupations sit?
Yeah.
Okay.
They did obviously consult with they did look at a lot of statistics prior to deciding on which occupations to remove, and I think further stakeholder consultation will occur. But prior to 19th of April, when these changes were released, not a lot was made available to us in terms of what like the reason behind making these changes. And I think it's funny how you mentioned also or asked with regards to was it industry specific. For example, to give you like an example of a type of client that I work with in the architecture industry, an interior designer would be on the short-term list, so they'll have 2 years and then a possible further 2 years, whereas an architect is on the medium to long-term list, which is a 4 years. So they fall into they work in the same types of companies, they have the same skill level requirements, yet one's on the short-term, one's on the medium to long-term. So
where's the logic in that? It's hard to say.
It's hard to say. So when you have like your clients come to you and say like, they ask that exact question, it's hard to give an opinion. As I say, as an agent, we just have to interpret the new legislation and make sure we apply it correctly.
It's a really good point, actually, which we talk about a lot on Small Biz Matters, which is all about making sure that you are part and active in your professional association, because this is a way that you, as a professional in your area of expertise, actually have some say and some impact on these things. So by all means, if you have a professional association that you have access to, become a member, get involved, be part of the committee and have a voice, because without these things, you, as you said, you need to be considered as a stakeholder in these decisions before you're allowed to kick and scream and, stamp your feet and say, I wasn't consulted. You probably were consulted in that professional association arena. So make sure you're reading your professional association newsletters. If you know that this affects you and this is going to have an impact, and look, you just use the example of an interior designer. For a million years would I have thought that sort of level of expertise or that area of expertise would be affected. But if you have an opinion on this and you feel strongly about it and it's going to affect your business, then speak to your professional association. Are you speaking to the government on this? Are you a stakeholder? Why aren't we? Where do we sit with this? Because this is going to affect my business and I need to have a say. Yeah. So just remember that, everyone. That's quite important. So those changes are mainly in regards to the lists. You did mention that there's an abolition coming for the 457, and I read that it's basically just being replaced by 2 other ones. Is that the 2 lists you were referring to, the short term and the medium to long term?
Yeah, so the 457 visa is actually being replaced by what's currently known as the TSS visa. We don't know what the subclass at this stage will be, what number it's going to be called. But yes, the TSS visa will have 2 streams, and it will depend on the occupation list as to which stream you fall under. So it will either have the short-term stream of 2 years with the possibility to renew for a further 2 years, or the medium term, which will be the 4 years. The fees will also go up.
Of course it will.
On 1st of...
quick, here's an opportunity to put the fees up. Let's do
it. They're going up on 1st of July by a minimal amount. The majority of fees are going up, it looks like, by around $5, so it's nothing too major.
But is that for the immigrant or for the business?
Both.
Okay.
Both. And then in March of next year, the TSS visa, the fees will change. So there'll be, for the short term, it will be $1,150, and for the medium term, it will be $2,400. So at the moment, it's $1,070 regardless. So it is a bit of a jump, particularly if you're on the medium to long term list. There's a lot of other changes that will come into play as well, surrounding the labour market testing, as I mentioned before, and also a higher standard of English will be required. So there's a lot of things that are coming into play, and they're also looking at revising that the training requirement for businesses. So at the moment, if you're a business, they look at your payroll, and basically you have to have spent a certain percentage of that payroll on training Australians, and it's looking like it's going to turn more to like a levy that will be payable for each overseas worker that you look to employ. So,
hang on, so you pay that to the government?
Yes.
But then how's that improving your training? Like they're not going to train your staff, are they?
They're not training your staff, but it's essentially a fund to train Australians.
No, it's not going into private colleges, is it? Because last one I heard about broke down yesterday. So. Is it going to TAFE?
We don't know.
That would be good, wouldn't it? Hello. Here, ideas, people, ideas. Why don't we take the money that's the levy that's going from the overseas workers that goes back into the TAFE system to read... Oh, my God. Okay, I can see a vision. I've got a vision. It's not going to be listened to by anyone in the political sphere, but we'll give it a whirl. So this levy is going to be based on the wages of everyone or just on the overseas workers? Do you know?
At the moment, it's based on the wages of everyone. So if you're looking to apply to become a business sponsor, you've got an overseas worker, the department will look at your overall payroll expenditure in the last 12 months, and then they'll want to see that a certain amount of that has been dedicated to training.
And there's a question for small businesses, because a lot of us do not even think about training opportunities for our staff and actually spending money on it. But realistically, happy staff means long-term, less turnover. Yep. We should be training our staff. And if this makes us think about that, even if we're not engaging with overseas workers, then all the better.
Yeah, and just on that as well, with when you do have a commitment to training Australians, then it is essentially over the long term going to take away your need to actually look to the overseas market. With the changes that are coming in March of next year, it's looking like it's not so much going to be based on your payroll expenditure and a percentage of that. It's going to be it's going to be just a set amount where they're going to say, look, you want one overseas worker, you have to pay this amount into the training fund. How they're going to monitor that, we're unsure. Whether if you're applying for a 2 or a 4 year visa, do you pay the 2 years up front? Or do you pay the 4 years up front? Or do you pay it each year? And how are they going to actually enforce it?
And what's training? You could see, I can envisage a whole bunch of corporates just sending through their staff through Landmark, for example. Is that considered training, or is that sort of considered personal development? Are they going to give specific training courses that you choose from? Are they going to send everyone to TAFE?
No, if as of March next year, it will just be a payment that goes to the government into a training fund, and then they'll allocate it how they see fit.
That might be a good question for Julie and Lisa. What are you going to do with that fund? Yeah, it's kind of like the, what's that long-term fund that the government has for education and medical? I don't know, there's a bunch of them, aren't there, where we all pay levies for that particular fund.
So as at now, there are strict requirements around training, what can and can't be included. And if you are looking at potentially as a business, if you want further information on that, that's where we come in. We'll help you potentially identify areas that will be accepted by the department. Certain things, there's as I say, there's very strict rules around what can and can't be included. And what is actually classed as training. And as you say, a lot of small businesses will say, look, I've got this really good overseas worker, and then we say, first question, what have you done training-wise? And they're like, not much.
What do you mean?
So, yeah, then we sit down with them and have a chat and see if we can identify things like apprentices. Their wages can be classed in as training. Recent graduates, some professional development courses, so expos, if there is an opportunity for professional development, may be included. But as I say, there are kind of strict parameters around what can and can't be included.
Exactly, which there should be, because I mean, realistically, I can imagine businesses just going, oh yeah, just go and watch those webinars on whatever topic you like, and we'll class that as you spending some time doing your training. So yeah, it's good that it's regulated. We're just going to take a quick break here on Small Biz Matters. You are listening to Triple H 100.1 FM. We'll be back after this community service announcement. Shelley and I, just here from Simply Visas, we've been talking about the importance of having good record keeping. It's not just about payroll, it's not just about employment regulations or tax or GST, but in fact, in the instance of maybe considering taking on an overseas worker to come and work in your business, you have to have those records in place, don't you?
Yep.
So we're talking about processes and procedures. You have to show that you're employing people correctly. You've got training strategies there for all of your staff, not just the overseas workers. And of course, you need to show that you've done due diligence and made sure that you're getting people from attempting to try and work with Australians first. Now, on that topic, do you think there's a particular sector in the Hornsby area that relies more heavily than others, in your experience, on overseas workers?
It's hard to say because obviously there is a number of different skilled occupations which you can look at for sponsorship. I think, to give you, I guess, an example of a local business that I've worked with, he was a landscaping company, and he had tried to source a landscape gardener, and he came across a young fellow on a working holiday visa who turned out to be excellent.
Was he experienced as well?
He was experienced.
So he was already here on a holiday visa, which means they could only work, correct me if I'm wrong, 20 hours a week and only for 6 months of the year?
On a working holiday visa, which is you can only work for up to 6 months with one employer. So the visa lasts for 12 months, and then you can kind of go off, do some travel,
pick some fruit.
If you want to extend it for a further 2 years, for a further year, then yes, you go off and do your fruit picking or work in a regional
I
area.
think that's good, because it makes the backpackers and, the European backpackers who are trying to get as much time here as they possibly can into regional centres,
Where
spending their
they're
money, where they're needed. It's a good idea. Well done, government. Golf clap. So what other sectors around here you're finding have the demand?
I would say
Construction.
yes, marketing and IT as well. It really just depends on the company. It depends what sector they work in, what skill sets they're looking for, and as I mentioned before, it could be a really niche skills set that they really can't locate here. It really depends. There's a lot of variables. So
when you look at the business breakdown in this area as well, it is a bit of a melting pot. I mean, we can easily look around us and go, oh, construction, I'm being overrun. But we've got fantastic, lots of consultants and professionals in the area. There's obviously engineers. There's a great hospitality industry. And I'm going to get political with you now. I'm going to ask you. We mentioned TAFE a little bit earlier with the possibility of having maybe a levy coming out of all businesses that goes into a sinking fund that can be used for training in general. And what effect has the decrease in and this is widely broadcast, the TAFE courses are being depleted. I was just listening on ABC the other day about a gentleman who works as a landscape gardener. He has been employing, electrician. No, builder. He's a builder. And he's been employing apprentices for the last 7 years. He's had about 12 of them come through his business, and he's been working with a number of them. Excuse me. And the question is, there's been a depletion. Like, for example, the full-time course is only 3 days facing now instead of 5 days in your typical TAFE course. Are we just band-aiding a situation with a training levy because we are sucking the life out of what was the lifeblood of apprentices and training in this country, in this state, which is TAFE? I'm just beginning to see a lot of correlations. What's your opinion on that from the immigration perspective? Are we gap filling because we are reducing the skill base of our workers here?
it's hard to say. It's either that or we need to really focus on education of our younger generation and be getting out there to schools and seeing the benefits of getting into a trade occupation. Like, I mean, one thing I will say that I was quite surprised by with these occupation lists and which ones had been removed and which ones are staying on is that there are a lot of trade occupations that have remained on the medium to long-term list.
Wow, surprise, surprise. I mean, even as a layman, I can see that's logical.
And I think, look, I don't know why it isn't as appealing as it once was for people to join trade occupations. It's quite well known that there's the earning capacity is great. You the sparkies, the plumbers, the builders, they have nice houses, nice cars, boats. I mean,
the demand is there as well.
The demand is there as well.
Sydney, it's exploding. So that's the question, isn't it? Why haven't we got kids wanting to go, and it's been decreasing.
Yep.
And then we've got these private colleges who have been receiving government funds, crazily as it is, who are falling over, and the CEOs who are receiving $1 million payouts for their redundancy. And then meanwhile, the TAFE continues to work off the smell of an oil rag with really, really dedicated staff. And I'm sorry, Matt Keane, I am not a unionist. I have not been talking to unions. It is me existing in my local community and seeing what's happening and listening to the tradies who are screaming out to go back to those courses, what they were and how fabulous. They were world-renowned. And we're just depleting them. And the only correlation that we can see is the reduction in funding. It doesn't make any sense. So I guess this is real life implications here. Like you said, those construction working jobs remain on the list because we need overseas workers to fill the gap.
Yeah.
And I guess that's going to start bleeding through to other sectors as well. IT is a logical one. I mean, I was at CBIT for 3 days of last week. A lot of overseas workers, a lot of international students are moving into that sector. Perhaps that's a big picture question that we need to be asking the politicians.
Yeah.
It does really affect us here.
Yeah, definitely.
So just to recap today, we've talked about the changes that are occurring and what your process needs to be. I mean, that process doesn't seem like it's changed too much. You've still got to have really good due diligence and good record keeping. And then we moved on to talking about the changes and the different lists and when the abolition is going to take place, and making sure that you're part of a professional association and part of the conversation as well. So those of you out there who are thinking about engaging with a local, yay for local, a local immigration specialist, just give us a quick plug for where your website is and how they can find out more information.
So our website is www.simplyvisas.com. If you have any general questions, feel free to get in touch at any time. I find it's always best to get in touch before things turn pear-shaped. So to get the information that you need in the first instance, rather than attempting something that you're unfamiliar with. We do work with a lot of businesses, large and small. So when it comes to applying to the department, it's always best to ensure a successful outcome for your business and for the overseas worker that you're looking to bring on. Obviously, track records are important when it comes to the department, as well as compliance. So, definitely, if you have any questions whatsoever, I'm more than happy to help. We do a free initial assessment, and then we can address any questions that you have with regards to the immigration process.
So it sounds like you need to get on the front foot. You need to be organised. If you can foresee this in your business future, start your record keeping, know what it is that you need to have in place. And again, engage with local expertise to find out, well, what do I need to do to be organised for when this actually happens? Because like you said, like everything with the government, it's a slow, steady train, and it's maybe how many step process? 6 months? Yeah, it's a long time.
Worst case scenario, 6 months.
Yeah, I'm just going to go with 6 months. I'm just going to assume every one of them is 6 months. No, well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Shelley. You've
Pleasure.
been very informative and interesting. And, of course, as always, if you've missed any of today's show, you can catch up on our smallbizmatters.com.au website. Go to the blogs and podcast page. Sydney, you have been listening to Small Biz Matters, the half-hour program where you work on your business rather than in it. We will see you all next week.